What if I told you that the chaos in Las Vegas was so extreme that Lewis Hamilton himself exploded against the governing body after discovering what really caused the red flag in FP2? You saw the session stop, but you did not see the truth. Cars were running at full speed over a manhole cover that was physically moving under them, the exact same failure that destroyed a Ferrari 2 years earlier. And right in the middle of that danger, Hamilton was battling serious instability in his Ferrari SF25, problems made even worse by the repeated interruptions that ruined every single push lap he tried to build. Stay right here, because once you hear what Hamilton said after stepping out of the car, you will understand why this moment has become one of the most shocking explosions of frustration ever directed at the governing body. The second practice session in Las Vegas began with the kind of tension that only a cold desert night can create. Drivers rolled out onto a track that was still holding the faint residue of earlier light rainfall, leaving patches of low grip that punished every small mistake. The asphalt temperature hovered near levels that made warming the tires almost impossible, forcing the field into long preparation laps as they searched for movement, traction, and a rhythm that simply refused to appear. When multiple drivers began reporting instability in the final sector, teams knew conditions were worse than expected, but no one imagined that something far more dangerous was developing beneath the surface. As the minutes passed, the performance window remained painfully narrow. The Las Vegas layout, with its long straights and slow corners, drained tire temperature faster than the cars could regenerate it. Engineers watched the timing screens oscillate wildly as grip disappeared from one lap to the next, turning the early phase of FP2 into a survival exercise rather than a proper performance session. Drivers were pushing just to gather baseline data, yet the track refused to offer consistency. The environment felt tense but manageable, until a marshal near turn 17 made an observation that changed everything about the night. That corner, among the fastest on the circuit, suddenly became the center of attention when the marshal reported that a manhole cover appeared unstable. The governing body responded by deploying a red flag and initiating a rapid inspection. Those watching from pit wall expected a long delay, especially given the infamous incident 2 years earlier when a similar failure destroyed a Ferrari. Instead, the inspection lasted just over 15 minutes, and the governing body announced that everything was secure and safe for cars to resume running. Teams accepted the message but exchanged looks of uncertainty, because the timeline felt rushed and the conditions were too cold for complacency. Once the session resumed, the track opened with barely 6 minutes remaining, creating a frantic rush as drivers attempted to salvage meaningful data from the chaos. Those brief minutes were some of the most intense of the night, with every car on track hunting a narrow window of performance while simultaneously navigating traffic, low tire temperature, and the difficulties of visibility created by the contrast of bright strip lighting and darker street sections. Then, in a moment that stunned commentators and engineers alike, Charles Leclerc reported a sudden gearbox issue that forced him to stop the car behind the barriers. The problem appeared isolated, but it was only the beginning of something far more serious. Almost immediately after Leclerc stopped, personnel who had remained near the suspect manhole noticed movement under cars passing at speed. This observation triggered instant alarm. Within seconds, the governing body deployed a second red flag, and the session was officially over. Confusion spread through the paddock because Leclerc's car was parked safely, meaning the red flag had to be for something else. When the truth surfaced that the same manhole declared safe minutes earlier was still shifting under load, the mood changed sharply. Every driver realized they had been driving at extreme speed over an unstable surface, and the governing body had failed to detect it during the initial inspection. For Lewis Hamilton, the interruption came at the worst possible moment. His Ferrari SF25 was struggling to generate tire temperature all session long, and each red flag reset the little progress he had made. He entered every push attempt with colder tires, unpredictable balance, and a loss of confidence in the grip beneath him. The chaos around the manhole amplified those issues because the session transformed from a data-gathering opportunity into a series of disrupted attempts that provided no stable information. By the time the second red flag ended the night, Hamilton stood in the garage frustrated, frozen out of performance, and convinced that the governing body had allowed a preventable danger to unfold in front of the entire field. The core problem that exploded during FP2 in Las Vegas was not simply a matter of poor grip or cold tires. It was the complete breakdown of trust between the drivers and the governing body after a structural safety risk reappeared on a circuit that had already suffered global humiliation 2 years earlier. When the first report of a loose manhole cover emerged, drivers assumed the inspection would be long and meticulous. Instead, the governing body completed its checks in barely over 15 minutes and immediately declared the circuit safe. This moment planted the first seed of doubt. Drivers know better than anyone that aerodynamic load from a modern ground effect car is enormous, and a static inspection cannot replicate the thousands of kilograms of downward force that these machines generate at full speed. The doubt grew into anger when the second red flag was thrown. What shocked the paddock was not that Charles Leclerc had stopped with a gearbox failure. It was that personnel remaining near the suspect manhole had witnessed the cover physically shifting under cars that were returning to full speed. The governing body had declared this specific manhole secure, yet under real racing load it behaved exactly like the one that caused a catastrophic incident in 2023. Drivers openly questioned how such a failure could occur again, especially when the circuit had undergone reinforced construction, additional inspections, and improved safety promises after the previous disaster. To them, this was not a coincidence. It was negligence. The problem intensified when drivers realized they had been exposed to an avoidable risk. Those final 6 minutes of resumed running, rushed and chaotic as they were, created a scenario where 20 cars drove over a compromised surface at more than 300 km per hour. For drivers, trust in the track surface is fundamental. Once that trust breaks, every lap feels uncertain, and every corner becomes a place where danger might exist beneath the asphalt rather than ahead of them. Many drivers expressed privately that the session should never have restarted until a dynamic load test had been performed, something that should have been standard procedure after the events of 2023. Lewis Hamilton, in particular, found himself in the middle of this storm because the instability of the track surface amplified the instability already present in his Ferrari SF25. He battled unpredictable grip throughout the session as the cold conditions prevented his tires from entering the proper temperature range. When a driver lacks confidence in tire grip and simultaneously hears that the track surface itself may be unreliable, frustration becomes inevitable. Hamilton pushed to build some kind of rhythm, but every interruption destroyed the delicate process of warming his tires. The moment confidence began to appear, the red flag froze everything again, and the tires dropped back into the danger zone of low temperature and reduced grip. His situation worsened when the session resumed because he was attempting to build tire temperature precisely as the track surface revealed its instability. While other drivers focused strictly on performance, Hamilton was forced to evaluate both the behavior of the car and the safety of the track. His nearly violent closing speed on Nico Hülkenberg illustrated the brittle nature of FP2. Reduced visibility, colder tires, and unpredictable balance created the perfect conditions for misjudgment. What could have been a high-speed collision instead became more evidence that the session had devolved into chaos. When Hamilton stepped out of the car afterward, his frustration reflected not only the performance limitations of the SF25 but the feeling that the session had been compromised from the moment the governing body chose to restart it. At the heart of the driver's outrage was a shared belief that the governing body had failed to respect the gravity of the situation. They did not question the need for caution. They questioned the decision to resume an inherently unsafe session for the sake of a few minutes of running. If you were sitting in a Formula One cockpit at 300 km per hour and later learned that the circuit beneath you had been shifting under load, would you trust the next inspection, or would you demand a full review before returning to the track? The answer to that question defines how each of us measures the boundary between performance and safety in a sport where the difference between control and catastrophe is measured in millimeters. The engineering crisis triggered in Las Vegas exposed how thin the margin for error has become in the era of ground effect cars. Modern Formula One machines rely on aerodynamics generated from the floor rather than the wings, which means the car depends entirely on a stable, predictable track surface. When the manhole cover beneath turn 17 began shifting under load, engineers immediately saw the danger through irregular spikes in vertical acceleration on the telemetry. Variations that should not exist appeared lap after lap, confirming that the surface was behaving like a flexible plate rather than a fixed structure. At those speeds, a car striking a displaced object is not simply a performance issue, it is a structural threat capable of destroying the floor and destabilizing the entire aerodynamic platform. Inside the Ferrari garage, the consequences were even more severe because the SF25 is particularly sensitive to changes in vertical load. The car's aerodynamic platform relies on a narrow ride height window, and any sudden variation can cause the floor to lose seal, resulting in immediate understeer or unpredictable rear slides. The repeated red flags worsened the situation by forcing Hamilton to slow down, cool the tires and then restart his warm-up cycle. Each cycle created new balance inconsistencies, and by the time he attempted a push lap, the car felt disconnected from the track. Engineers described the session as data chaos, because every lap Hamilton produced carried a completely different aerodynamic balance profile. The second red flag made the engineering picture almost impossible to interpret. With Charles Leclerc's gearbox failure already removing one Ferrari from the session, the team had planned to rely heavily on Hamilton's data to shape their setup direction. But the unstable manhole turned every high-speed run into a safety risk and every medium-speed sector into a misleading reference. Ferrari's simulation tools require uninterrupted sequences of laps to model tire behavior, braking energy, and aerodynamic load. Instead, they received fragments of telemetry interrupted by long pauses, low tire temperature, and rapidly shifting grip conditions. The result was that nothing Hamilton experienced could be trusted as a base for engineering decisions. The cold temperatures added another layer of complexity. With the asphalt still affected by earlier rainfall, the surface struggled to retain any of the heat drivers tried to generate. Hamilton's tires dropped temperature the moment he reduced speed, and the red flags forced him into several slow periods that undid all of his preparation. Engineers attempted to compensate with brake duct adjustments and changes to differential locking to create additional heat input, but these changes were blunt tools that could not overcome the instability of the environment. The SF25 felt disconnected, especially through the medium-speed corners, where Hamilton described rear grip as vanishing unpredictably the moment he attempted to rotate the car.